The Book of Spells. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Library. Ariana Young had always loved books. From the time she was old enough to read, she had devoured every story she could get her hands on, often disappearing into the pages of grand adventures while the real world faded into the background. The town library, an ancient structure with towering shelves and hidden corners, had become her second home. While other teenagers spent their afternoons at the mall or playing video games, Ariana preferred the scent of aged paper and ink, the quiet rustling of pages turning, and the comforting solitude the library offered. It was on a particularly stormy afternoon that she found herself wandering through the library's less frequented sections. Rain lashed against the towering stained-glass windows, and the flickering light of the chandeliers cast eerie shadows on the floor. She traced her fingers along the spines of countless books, feeling the history embedded within them. Some were modern, their covers glossy and pristine, while others were old, their bindings cracked and their pages yellowed with time. As she meandered deeper into the labyrinth of shelves, she noticed something strange. A corridor she had never seen before stretched into darkness. The library was familiar to her. Every corner, every creaky floorboard, but this section was completely unknown. Had she simply overlooked it all these years? Drawn by an inexplicable curiosity, she stepped forward. The lighting grew dimmer, and the air turned cool, carrying the scent of parchment and something faintly metallic, like old coins. The books here were ancient, their titles barely legible in the low light. Some bore languages she did not recognize, their letters twisting like living things. Others had no titles at all, their covers adorned with intricate symbols. Then she saw it. Nestled among the forgotten tomes was a book unlike any she had ever seen. Its cover was bound in dark leather, smooth yet firm beneath her fingertips. Golden symbols etched across its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light. There was no title, no author's name, just that mesmerizing glow tracing the edges. Ariana felt an immediate pull toward it, as if the book was waiting for her. Tentatively, she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, a chill raced up her spine, sending a shudder through her entire body. A strange sensation washed over her, something between exhilaration and foreboding. Her heartbeat quickened, but she couldn't bring herself to let go. Ahem. Ariana jumped, nearly dropping the book. She spun around to find the librarian standing beside her. Miss Halloway was an elderly woman with piercing green eyes that seemed to see through everything. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she carried an air of authority that demanded respect. "Be careful with that one," she said in a hushed tone, her gaze locked onto the book in Ariana's hands. "Some books are not meant to be read." Ariana swallowed, suddenly feeling small beneath the librarian's scrutiny. It looked interesting," she replied, forcing a smile. Miss Halloway's expression remained unreadable. "Curiosity is a powerful thing, Miss Young. But not all knowledge is safe." Despite the warning, Ariana couldn't ignore the allure of the book. Something about it called to her, whispered to her in a voice she couldn't quite hear. She met Miss Halloway's gaze and nodded. "I'll be careful." The librarian studied her for a moment longer before sighing. "Very well. But do not say I did not warn you." Ariana clutched the book tightly as she made her way to the checkout counter. Even as she signed it out, she could feel Miss Halloway's eyes watching her, as if silently willing her to reconsider. But Ariana's mind was made up. The moment she left the library and stepped into the stormy evening, she knew, deep down, that her life was about to change forever. The walk home was a blur. The rain came down in torrents, soaking through her hoodie as she clutched the book beneath her jacket, shielding it from the elements. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the path ahead. Her house was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. Once inside, She peeled off her wet clothes and changed into something dry, her mind consumed by the book. She settled onto her bed, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting elongated shadows on the walls. Carefully, she placed the book on her lap and ran her fingers over the golden symbols. They were warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, almost as if they were alive. Ariana hesitated. Should she open it? Miss Holloway's warning echoed in her mind, but her curiosity burned hotter than ever. Slowly, she lifted the cover. The pages were unlike any she had ever seen. They shimmered, shifting between parchment and something darker, something almost fluid. The text was written in an unfamiliar script, the letters twisting and reshaping as she tried to focus on them. Then, as if sensing her confusion, the words rearranged themselves, morphing into English before her eyes. The one who seeks knowledge shall find more than they bargained for. Ariana's breath hitched. She flipped to the next page. More words appeared, shifting and reforming, telling a story that felt ancient and forbidden. As she read, she became lost in the tale of a secret order of scholars who had uncovered hidden truths about the universe, of books that contained real magic, of doors to other realms concealed within the pages of forgotten tomes. Then something strange happened. The edges of the book glowed brighter, and a faint whisper filled the air. It was not coming from the pages but from around her, as though the very walls of her room were speaking. The words were indistinct, a hushed murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. Ariana snapped the book shut. The whispering stopped. Heart pounding, she glanced around her room. Everything was as it should be. Her desk piled with books and notebooks, her closet slightly ajar, the posters on her walls unmoved. But the air felt charged, as though something unseen had just retreated into the shadows. She exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she was just tired. But deep down she knew this book was no ordinary book. And whatever she had just begun, it was far from over. Chapter 2. The First Omen. That night, Ariana sat at her desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of her room. Her desk lamp cast a soft, warm glow across the space, contrasting with the chill of the evening air outside. She had barely slept the night before, haunted by the strange, cryptic book she had found in the dusty corner of the library. The pages were filled with symbols she didn't understand, each one a mystery, yet they seemed to pull her in with an inexplicable force. Her fingers hovered over the first page as she opened the book. The paper was old, brittle at the edges, yet the ink, dark and precise, looked almost new, as though it had been written just yesterday. Each symbol danced across the page like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and Ariana couldn't help but trace her finger over one of them, the cool texture of the paper grounding her in the moment. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, startling her. The windows were shut tight, so where could it have come from? The wind was cold, carrying with it an eerie sensation that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker at the edge of her vision, an undefined shadow that seemed to move with the wind. But when she turned her head to look, there was nothing there. The lamp on her desk flickered, casting strange shadows across her walls. Ariana's heartbeat quickened, and she felt a chill crawl up her spine. The whisper came then, so faint at first that she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. It was soft and barely perceptible, like the distant murmur of someone speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Her hand jerked away from the book, her heart pounding in her chest as she quickly slammed it shut. The wind stopped. The lamp steadied. The room returned to an unsettling silence. For a long moment, Ariana just stared at the book, her mind racing. Was it the book that had caused the strange wind? Or had she simply imagined the whole thing? But the chill she still felt in the air, the whisper that clung to her ears, told her otherwise. Something was not right. With a deep breath, Ariana pushed the book aside and tried to focus on anything else. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just touched something far more dangerous than she could comprehend. The next morning, Ariana tried to go about her day as usual, but the strange events of the previous night loomed in her mind, casting a shadow over everything. She was still shaken, but she tried to push it down, telling herself it was just a fluke. There was no reason to believe anything supernatural was going on. She was being irrational, right? But as she stood in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee, the first sign that something was truly wrong occurred. As she lifted the mug to her lips, it suddenly slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor in a sharp explosion of ceramic shards. Ariana froze, staring down at the mess. The coffee had splashed across the floor, staining the tiles, but it wasn't the mess that unsettled her. It was the way the cup had shattered, suddenly, without any provocation, as though it had exploded on its own. Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. What was that? She thought. Had she somehow been too clumsy? Or was this connected to the book from last night? Careful, her mother called from the other room, her voice filled with concern. You all right, honey? Ariana quickly nodded, forcing a smile as she bent down to pick up the broken pieces. Yeah, I've seen it. Just a little jumpy. But it wasn't just that moment. It was everything after. At school, things only seemed to get worse. Ariana sat at her desk in first period, her fingers tapping nervously against the surface. She tried to focus on the lecture, but the events of the morning still hung over her like a dark cloud. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like something was following her. Something she couldn't escape. As she tried to take notes, her laptop screen began to glitch, the words she typed turning into a jumble of meaningless symbols. Confused, she pressed the keys again, only for the same nonsense to appear. The strange symbols were almost identical to those in the book. Panic rose in her chest as she slammed the laptop shut. She couldn't ignore the connection anymore. The symbols in the book, the shattered cup, the flickering lamp. Was it all some kind of omen? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp cry from across the room. She looked up to see her best friend, Emily, stumbling forward, her ankle giving out beneath her. Emily's eyes were wide with surprise, and she grabbed at the desk to steady herself before collapsing to the floor, clutching her ankle in pain. Ariana leapt out of her seat. Emily, she cried, rushing over to her. Emily grimaced as she tried to sit up. I'm fine, I don't know what happened. I was walking and she broke off with a pained wince. I don't know. I just tripped. Ariana bit her lip, unease crawling up her spine. You didn't trip. You twisted your ankle, but it's like you didn't even see it coming. Emily laughed weakly, trying to make light of the situation. Bad luck follows you today, she joked, though the words sounded forced, as though she was trying to mask her own confusion. Ariana forced a smile, but her stomach churned. She couldn't help but wonder if something she had done, or something she had come in contact with, was causing all this. But what? And why? The idea that the book might be involved was ridiculous, wasn't it? It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. She must be imagining things. As the day went on, strange occurrences seemed to follow her everywhere. Her phone malfunctioned during a group project, showing random notifications she had never received. Her locker door jammed, refusing to open despite repeated attempts. It was as if everything she touched went wrong. By the time school ended, Ariana was exhausted, her nerves frayed. She didn't know how to explain what was happening, and she didn't know who to talk to. Was she going crazy? Or had the book somehow triggered this? The more she thought about it, the more her doubts grew. That evening, Ariana found herself standing in front of her desk again, the book lying closed in front of her. Her fingers hovered over it once more, hesitant but drawn to it as if it held the answers she needed. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and slowly opened it to the first page. The symbols were there, unchanged. But this time, she could feel something different, an energy in the air, almost like the room was alive with expectation. What was she supposed to do now? The whisper came again, louder this time, almost like it was calling her name. The sound sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't pull herself away. Ariana, the voice seemed to say, the sound of it both foreign and familiar. You are the chosen one, the first of many to feel the awakening. Her heart raced as the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, twisting around her as if the very walls were closing in. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice trembling in the stillness. The pages of the book fluttered as if caught in an invisible wind. The symbols shimmered, blurring before her eyes, and for a brief moment, Ariana swore she saw something moving in the shapes, a figure, or perhaps a presence, waiting, watching, and guiding. And then, as quickly as it had come, the presence was gone. Ariana slammed the book shut, gasping for air. She stumbled back from her desk, her mind reeling from what had just happened. It couldn't be real, could it? Could there really be something beyond this world? Something that had chosen her for some unknown purpose? Her heart pounded in her chest, and she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Something had been awakened, and it wasn't going to stop until it had all of her. Chapter 3. The Curse Unfolds. Ariana barely slept for the next few nights. Every time she closed her eyes, the whispers returned, soft, insidious voices threading through her mind like creeping vines. Sometimes, she caught fragments of words, spoken in a language she couldn't understand. Other times, it was just an eerie hush, a presence lingering just out of sight. At first, she tried to convince herself it was stress. Maybe she was overthinking everything, the book, the strange occurrences, Emily's accident. But when the world around her started shifting in ways she couldn't explain, denial was no longer an option. Doors slammed shut on their own, even when there was no wind. Objects she swore she had just put down vanished, only to reappear in bizarre places, her toothbrush in the freezer, her phone inside the oven. Her notebooks were filled with handwriting she didn't remember writing, the same strange symbols from the book scrawled across the pages. The worst was the shadows. At first, she thought she was imagining them, just tricks of the light, shifting as she moved. But then they started behaving in ways they shouldn't. They stretched unnaturally long, bending toward her, reaching. She caught glimpses of figures in the corners of her vision, tall and watching. Yet whenever she turned her head, they were gone. Her parents noticed her restlessness, but she brushed off their concerns. She couldn't explain what was happening. Who would believe her? Then came the moment that shattered any lingering doubt. It was late at night, and Ariana stood in front of her bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on her face. She had just endured another sleepless night, filled with whispering voices and flickering shadows. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her skin pale. But then, as she raised her head to look into the mirror, she froze. Her reflection wasn't mirroring her movements. She stood still, but the girl in the mirror smiled. It was slow and deliberate, a sinister curve of the lips that had nothing to do with Ariana's own expression. Her breath caught in her throat, her body paralyzed in sheer terror. Then, the reflection's eyes darkened, turning into hollow, endless voids. Ariana stumbled backward, crashing into the bathroom counter. No, 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 she whimpered. But the reflection didn't stop smiling. And then it moved, not like a normal reflection. It stepped forward, as if trying to cross the boundary of the mirror. Ariana bolted. She ran from the bathroom, down the hall, into her bedroom and slammed the door shut, panting. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. This wasn't her imagination. This wasn't stress. This was real. And it was getting worse. She couldn't stay here. Grabbing the cursed book from her desk, she shoved it into her backpack and rushed out of the house. Back to the library. The library was dark when Ariana arrived, the towering bookshelves casting long shadows across the dimly lit room. It should have been closed at this hour, but when she pushed the heavy wooden doors, they swung open without resistance, almost as if they had been expecting her. The musty scent of old paper filled her nostrils as she stepped inside. The silence felt suffocating. And then she saw her. The old librarian stood at the far end of the room, waiting. Her piercing eyes locked onto Ariana the moment she entered, as though she had known this moment would come. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "You opened it, didn't you?" the woman sighed, shaking her head. Ariana swallowed hard, clutching the book to her chest, as if that could somehow protect her. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice trembling. I thought it was just some old book. But ever since I read it, things have been happening. I keep seeing things. Shadows. Voices. And my reflection." She shuddered. "It's not me anymore." The librarian studied her for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then she nodded. "That book is not meant to be read by ordinary eyes." Ariana's hands tightened around the cursed object. "Please, tell me how to stop this." The librarian hesitated before speaking, as if weighing her words carefully. "There's only one way." Ariana's breath caught. "What is it?" The woman exhaled slowly. "The book is bound to you now. You invited it in. It has marked you." She reached out and tapped the cover with one wrinkled finger. "You must break the connection before it consumes you." Ariana's skin prickled. "How?" "The book must be returned to its origin. And sealed away. Permanently." Ariana blinked. Where did it come from? The librarian's eyes darkened. A place that was never meant to be disturbed. A chill ran down Ariana's spine. "And if I don't return it?" The librarian's face was grim. "Then the things you've seen? The voices? The shadows? They will not stop. They will grow stronger. Until they take you completely." Ariana's throat tightened. She had felt it already. The presence creeping closer, the grip of something unseen tightening around her life. She couldn't let that happen. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay steady. "Tell me what I need to do." The librarian studied her, then finally nodded. "Come with me." She turned and walked deeper into the library, past the rows of ancient bookshelves, past the restricted section, to a door Ariana had never noticed before. It was old, iron-bound, and etched with symbols disturbingly similar to the ones in the book. As the librarian reached for the handle, the air around them grew heavier, charged with something Ariana couldn't name. "This," the woman said quietly, "is where it begins." Ariana's heart pounded. She knew that whatever lay beyond that door would change everything. And there was no turning back now. Chapter 4. Breaking the Spell. The librarian moved with a quiet urgency, leading Ariana through the labyrinth of bookshelves deeper into the library's restricted section. Dust swirled in the dim light as they passed towering rows of ancient tomes bound in leather and gold. Ariana had been to this library countless times, yet she had never seen this part before. The air grew colder the farther they went, and she felt an inexplicable weight pressing down on her chest. Finally, they reached a heavy, iron-bound door set into the stone wall. It was different from any other door in the library, etched with strange symbols that pulsed faintly, like they were alive. The librarian placed a hand on the door, whispering something under her breath. Ariana caught only fragments of the words, something old, something powerful. The symbols flared for a moment before the door groaned open, revealing a spiral staircase leading down into darkness. Ariana hesitated. Where are we going? The foundation, the librarian replied. This library was built upon something ancient, a place meant to keep dangerous knowledge sealed away. Ariana swallowed hard but followed. Each step echoed in the silence, and the deeper they went, the colder it became. By the time they reached the bottom, Ariana could see her breath in the air. They stepped into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The stone walls were lined with shelves filled with books that looked far older than any she had ever seen. Some were bound in thick leather, others in materials she didn't recognize, things that made her stomach twist just looking at them. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient stone pedestal, its surface engraved with intricate patterns. Ariana could feel it before she even stepped closer, a raw, crackling energy pulsing from it, as if the very air around it was alive. The librarian turned to her, eyes solemn. You must return the book to its rightful place. Ariana clutched the book tightly to her chest. And then this will all stop? The librarian nodded. Once it is sealed, the curse will lose its hold on you. She hesitated, then added, but beware. The book does not like to be abandoned. Ariana's stomach churned at those words. It had already been tormenting her. What more could it possibly do? Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the pedestal. The moment she did, the air grew heavier, pressing down on her shoulders. The book in her hand seemed to vibrate, as though resisting what was about to happen. Ariana's fingers trembled as she reached out. Slowly, carefully, she set the book onto the pedestal. The reaction was immediate. A sharp gust of wind howled through the chamber, though there was no source for it. The golden symbols on the book's cover flared to life, burning like molten fire. The stone beneath their feet trembled, sending tiny cracks through the floor. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, more insistent. Do not leave me. Ariana's breath caught. The voice wasn't just in her head anymore. It filled the room, surrounding her, wrapping around her like unseen hands. I have given you power. Do not abandon me. The pedestal shook violently, and Ariana felt something pulling at her, an invisible force dragging her toward the book. She stumbled back, digging her heels into the ground, but it was relentless. The pull intensified, tugging at her limbs, her mind, her very soul. Shadows erupted from the book, twisting and writhing like living tendrils. They reached for her, grasping, trying to drag her back into their grasp. Ariana gasped, thrashing against them. The librarian's voice cut through the chaos. Resist it. Look away from the book. Do not let it take hold of you. Ariana clenched her jaw and shut her eyes tight. The force yanked harder, her body straining against it. It was as if the book itself was trying to claim her, refusing to let go. You are mine, the voice hissed, furious now. You belong to me. No. Ariana ground out through clenched teeth. With every ounce of strength she had left, she forced herself to turn away from the book, away from the whispering voices, away from the shadows. She braced herself, gripping the edge of the pedestal to steady herself against the pole. And then, everything stopped. The whispers vanished. The force pulling at her released. The air settled. Ariana's eyes flew open. The book was no longer glowing. The shadows had retreated. The pedestal was still and silent once more. It was over. She staggered backward, chest heaving, her body trembling from the effort. The librarian stepped forward, placing a hand on the pedestal. It is done, she said softly. Ariana let out a shaky breath, barely able to believe it. She was free. The aftermath. As Ariana stepped out of the library, she felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of rain. For the first time in days, she could breathe. She looked up at the stars, letting the relief wash over her. It was finally over. The book, the curse, it was behind her now. She had learned her lesson. Some books were better left unread. But as she walked away, deep in the shadows of the library, something stirred. The book's cover flickered. Just for a moment. The golden symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with life. Waiting, watching, and searching for its next victim.